Hello, and welcome to this presentation and panel discussion on electric school buses and environmental justice. We're ensuring a fair transition, and it's hosted by the Canadian Electric School Bus Alliance, a joint initiative of Eket and Green Communities Canada. My name is Sunita Gupta. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the EDII project manager at Green Communities Canada. I'm your host and moderator today, and I'm very appreciative that you have all joined us on this session today. Before we begin, we acknowledge the many treaty and traditional territories of Indigenous nations throughout Canada. We are grateful for the continued work at many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who are the original caretakers of the land and waters. In our work as environmental leaders, we have a responsibility to respect Indigenous perspectives and elevate Indigenous voices. For myself, I am joining you all from Kingston, Ontario, and I'm humbled and honored to live, work, and play on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. I acknowledge that I am a settler on this land and recognize its long history predates the early establishment of European colonies. I'm committed to deepen my understanding of the local Indigenous communities as we all try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today's session includes a short introduction of the Canadian Electric School Bus Alliance, a presentation from the World Resources Institute followed by a brief Q&A, a panel discussion, another Q&A, and then we will finish with some concluding remarks. If you have any questions during the presentation and panel discussion, please write them in the Questions tab at the bottom right of your screen, and we will share them orally, and we will share them orally for the panelists. For anything else, comments, reactions, links, you can use the chat function. So, please note that this session is being recorded and that the recording will be made available to the attendees after the event. The Canadian Electric School Bus Alliance, for short, CESBA, is a Canada-wide coalition of organizations from environmental NGOs and health associations to fleet operators and EV advocacy groups, all of them advocating for policies that accelerate school bus electrification. We aim to see all Canadian school bus fleets We aim to see all school bus fleets be electrified by 2040 or sooner. To get us started, I am pleased to introduce our presenters from the World Resource Institute, also known as WRI, which is a global leader in the ESB transition, and in January 2023, they published their equity framework to guide the electric school bus transition resource. We are very lucky to be joined today by Carla Walker, Elizabeth Moses, and Sophie Young. Carla is the Director of Environmental Justice and Equity for WRI US. In this role, she provides leadership to WRI US's work around equity, environmental justice, and just transition in the context of climate change to expand visibility and impact, and influence decision makers and advance solutions for today's environmental changes and challenges. Carla holds a BS in biology from the University of Cincinnati, an MS in environmental engineering science from the University of Florida, and an MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School. She serves on the board of directors for Ohio Citizens Action, Clean Fuels Ohio, Lloyd Library, Black Art Speak Artists Collective, and Green Umbrella. Which is the Regional Sustainability Alliance in Southwest Ohio. Welcome, Carla. Elizabeth is a senior environmental rights and justice associate with the Environmental Democracy Practice. In WRI's Center for Equitable Development, she currently leads work on Indigenous land and environmental defenders and manages a wide range of projects focused on water and air quality, government and corporate accountability, extractives and transition minerals, and strengthening implementation of environmental laws and policies. She holds a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Washington and BS degree in Psychology and Biology from Syracuse University. Welcome, Elizabeth. Sophie is a manager of environmental justice and equity. She oversees equity research and supports stakeholder engagement for WRI's electric school bus initiative. Sophie earned a Master's of Environmental Management from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and a BA in International Development Studies and Rhetoric from the University of California, Berkeley. It is humbling to be among such esteemed panelists. Welcome, everyone. I will now pass it over to Carla to begin the presentation.
Sunita, so nice of you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sunita said, my name is Carla Walker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from the native homeland of the Indigenous Algonquin-speaking tribes, including the Delaware, Miami, and Shawnee tribes, now known as Cincinnati, Ohio. As the Director of Environmental Justice and Equity for the U.S. at World Resources Institute, I have the honor of working with a team of experts to deliver an equity framework for the Electric School Bus Initiative. Next slide, please. Today, I'll share an overview of the Electric School Bus Initiative's equity approach, and just for ease of speaking, I'll refer to the Electric School Bus Initiative as the ESB initiative. I'll also talk a little bit about how our equity approach looks in action and share some of what we've learned, and hopefully that could be useful in consideration of the Canadian context. Next slide. So what you'll see here is WRI's official mission statement. So just to point out to you that it includes turning big ideas into action. And just so you'll see, one of their really big ideas was to transition the US school bus fleet to electric. Next slide. So in collaboration with partners and communities, WRI's Electric School Bus Initiative aims to create unstoppable momentum toward an equitable transition of the U.S. school bus fleet to electric by 2030. The project is looking at bringing health, climate, and economic benefits to children and families across the U.S., and furthermore, normalizing electric mobility for an entire generation. So we really see ourselves as being here to make the electric school bus opportunity a reality. Next slide. For some context, I just want to share a bit of a snapshot of just some of the inequities in the US as they relate to school bus transportation. Diesel exhaust from school buses contribute to ambient pollution broadly, and as these buses drive and travel through neighborhoods, they can pose a local residential risk and concentrate pollution around schools when idling. So while air pollution is disproportionately created by the consumption of goods and services by non-Hispanic white Americans, it's Black and Hispanic populations who breathe the most pollution, and air pollution overall is a significant problem for Native Americans, resulting in childhood asthma rates that are far above and beyond the national average. Next slide, please. And we'll see here some of the hurdles to electrification. One being the current price tag of ESBs. They are approximately three times that of a diesel bus. It also takes an incredible amount of time and money to build out the ESB infrastructure. One other hurdle that we've seen is that most school districts are not really familiar with ESB technology, and it leads to a lot of ESB technological myths, right? Range anxiety being one, where we know current buses can fulfill the needs of 90% of the routes that we have for schools. One of the other myths is that ESBs don't necessarily work in cold weather. We've heard that a lot, but we actually know that they do. And that has been proven in states in the US like Minnesota and other places. The other is that there is this urgency, right? We do need to think about scaling quickly. Right now, less than 1% of the US school bus fleet is currently electrified. So we know we have quite a bit of work to do. Next slide. So how did we structure our project to help address some of these issues and other equity challenges? We're using a multiple stakeholder model, whereby we have a project team focused on each stakeholder of the electric school bus ecosystem, right? So right now we have a team working directly with school districts. They're providing technical assistance, helping to make sure that school districts understand what are the federal opportunities and helping to connect them to those. We have a team working directly with manufacturers, working also with utilities. There's a sub-team within the utility project team that looks at looking at the innovation of financing for these assets. We have a team working with policymakers, both at the federal and at the state level, and then a team that engages and builds awareness across communities. And then you'll see in this graphic that each team and the project overall is rooted in equity, communications, and engagement to shore up the goal of an equitable transition to ESBs. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to move a little bit into the details of our equity framework. Go ahead, next slide. Our equity team has developed 5 overarching goals and 4 strategies you'll see here. These help shape our project policies, practices, and our activities. As well, they ensure alignment between the support that our equity team provides across all of those different project teams, and also what the project needs to deliver on overall project goals. And we've also made sure that this is baked into our targeted indicators for our monitoring, evaluation, and learning activities. So for example, we are monitoring the equitable project outcomes for each of those project teams. And so that looks like monitoring the percentage of school districts in underserved communities with at least one ESB, or looking at the number of public funding programs available for purchasing electric school buses and related infrastructure by those that include an equity requirement or not. And another example that we look at is the percent of financial industry actors with increased knowledge of the financial case for ESBs, including benefits for underserved communities. And so what does that look like in practice? Let's take a look at the next slide. Our equity team has 3 work streams that you see here, right? 1, we work to support every other project team across the project. We have our framework guidance, and then we build this internal knowledge through and capacity of the team through a community of practice. And so let's walk through those a little bit more in detail. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So for our cross-cutting team, and you'll see this slide actually talks about the cross-cutting team as well as the community of practice, cross-cutting work stream. So for the cross-cutting work stream, we've assigned an equity, what we call an equity point of contact. This is an equity team member in each one of those project teams. They go to all of their meetings. They're working with them to provide some direct support to raise and resolve equity issues as the broader work is implemented, designed, and they also help create specific equity strategies for each of those project teams. Those equity points of contacts also serve as liaisons back to the equity team to help strengthen overall communication and coordination between all of the different puzzle pieces that we're working with. For our community of practice work stream, we've worked to build the equity muscle of all of our staff across the project, because the idea of addressing equity and centering equity, that should be something that is the responsibility of all the project team, not just the equity team. And so we've done that by creating a couple of different programs. One is our Let's Break to Educate bi-monthly learning series. It features environmental justice, mobility, and equity experts who share their knowledge and expertise with our team. And it's important to note here that we've designed this not to be prescriptive, but it is intended to ensure a fundamental understanding of the history of key equity concepts and help make connections between those concepts and the electric school bus deployment. Then we've created these unstructured spaces. We call them equity happy hours, or office hours. And that's an opportunity for our staff to meet, raise questions that they might have, concerns around their work, share any challenges that they're seeing and successes, or even bring up some other topics for discussion. And then our team regularly shares links to research or news that help deepen the understanding of equity intersections relevant to our work. Next slide. So our framework, our approach to this is outlined in our equity framework, which Sunita shared, was published earlier this year. It is a working paper or white paper, and we absolutely intend to update and revise that regularly as we complete more research or as we work through this, as we work through the project. Next slide. The framework outlines our vision and definition for equity. But to translate that vision into action, we focused on both leadership and guidance for partnerships, and conducted preliminary research to help us unpack the experiences of underserved communities and equity intersections. Now, we don't have the time right now to go through everything and go through all the details, but I do want to highlight a couple of and a few of these steps. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that the equity team has created several internal guidance documents and internal processes that we share back with the team. Those really help us institutionalize equity across partnerships, engagement, and our research activities. So our partnership engagement guidance provides a common framework for how we should create, develop, implement, and work with partners. Similarly, we have a community engagement guidance document that provides direction to our project teams on how to think about engaging communities for their relevant stakeholder groups. So our teams are then equipped to bring the topic of community engagement up when they're talking to various stakeholder groups. We've also developed an equity review process that guides the evaluation of research questions and methodology for equity implications, and ensures that any proposed research plan aligns with our overall equity vision and goals as outlined in the framework. And the goal of this equity review is to ensure that all ESB initiative research addresses relevant equity components, and also provides support back to support and feedback to our researchers. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that the equity team provides ongoing support to each project team. And so some examples of that are in the ways in which we've played a key role in helping to develop project working groups by helping to create the goals and equity strategies for those working groups, even setting agendas, and by soliciting membership to ensure that we have a diverse representation and diverse perspectives at those tables. We've also created a data-driven framework for prioritizing technical assistance to districts that face the highest socioeconomic and environmental burdens due to income, race, air pollution, and tribal status. I really like this next slide because it's a visual representation of the diverse groups of partners that we are working with across this project. Part of the equity team's mission is also to ensure that the project is advancing a partner-driven, accountable approach that recognizes how existing systems of power grant privilege and access unequally and must continuously be addressed and changed. And so we also know we at WRI, we can't do that alone. And that's why our team has been involved with working to ensure that our project collaborates, partners, and subgrants to organizations that really have a history of laying the foundation for this work, and to partner with and provide funding to equity and justice organizations. Next slide, please. Our team is also continuing to conduct research on key equity intersections. You'll see here on the screen. We anticipate a publication schedule, fingers crossed, that starts in December and kind of rolls out these research publications through the spring of 2024. Next slide. Oh, great. Talk about some key project lessons, and these are just some to highlight some insights that we've learned throughout our Equity First project work. These may be useful to CISPA or others that are interested in a similar type of project. So definitely, one, take the time that's needed to develop your guidance document. The framework is what is going to help provide clarity and guidance and decision making for your team. Definitely understand that equity it's the outcome you're looking for, but equity is also a process, and it needs to be baked into the DNA of your project. And the framework can help you do that and help institutionalize equity across your project. You want to make sure that you're working with communities your project intends to benefit early and often. These communities know what they need, and they can help co-create and co-develop the solutions that will help you achieve your goals. Finally, resources. I believe fundamentally that budgets are moral documents. And so projects that are trying to drive equity and center equity really need to have an adequate and appropriate line item in their budget for that project to deliver on those goals. Next, I'll close with this slide that highlights a number of the key challenges to a just transition that we've uncovered through our project work and our research. And so granted, some of these challenges may be specific to a US context, but I think our team really thought that perhaps some of them may be relevant to think through for CISPA as well. I appreciate you giving us the time to share our work, and I'll turn it back over to you, Sunita.
Thank you for that, Carla. Terrific presentation. Just opening it up for the audience if they have any questions for Carla. We will have a Q&A period later on as well, but we can come back to that. Well, I'm just curious, and I have a question for you, Carla. I'm just wondering, how are you integrating sectors of mobility, transit, and energy in discussions around equity and ESBs through your COP and other strategies and approaches?
I'm going to open it up and see also. I know I have Sophie and Liz here to help out with that. I think the way that we've been doing this is really through each of our project teams that have been working. We've been creating and working with them to create equity strategies, and from the very beginning, kind of identifying what are some of the key intersections that they are seeing. And if they have not, and in some cases, they may not be, those things may not be daylighted from the very beginning. So we've been also creating an equity research portfolio that looks to kind of really drill down into what are some of the, what we would call like our baseline understanding of what some of those issues might look like. I'm excited to share that we've done that in two different ways. We have a baseline stakeholder advocacy analysis that we just recently published, I want to say maybe a month or two ago. And we've also been looking at a baseline, for us, a baseline understanding of what are some of the critical equity issues that our school districts are facing in that transition to ESBs. And that research is slated for a December publication. Liz and Sophie, I may have missed something in that, but if I have, please come on and let and share out.
Thank you, Carla. I also see there's a question from someone in the audience, from Angelo. I'm just going to read that out. In order to reduce cost and remove one ICE from the roads, are you considering to retrofit school buses in its middle age?
That is also an option that our teams are looking at, as in terms of providing those options to school districts. I want to be clear too. The electric school bus initiative, we're really designed to support school districts in that transition. We don't have funds to provide to school districts to make that transition, but we're really trying to be the conduit to support them in doing that. So by providing them with options of how they can reduce their costs, that is yes, that is also an option. That is also something that we have been doing, but we've also been very, very actively involved in connecting school districts to those federal opportunities and those incentives that the feds have provided over the last 2 years with the Clean School Bus program out of our US EPA that does provide funds for the gap there.
Great, fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Carla and Gideon and Jessica, for this presentation, and we will move along. Sorry, my bad, Carla and Sophie. I skipped ahead. So we will move to the general panel discussion now. We are also pleased to inform everyone that this conversation does not stop here today. So CESBA will be pursuing research on the topic in 2024, and we will continue this discussion. So moving on to our panel discussion now. This is question is for Gideon. Gideon, what can we learn from WRI's equity framework to apply to the Canadian context? What are your key learnings, takeaways, and why should equity, environmental justice be part of the transition to transportation electrification?
Wow, well, that's a tall question, lots of different pieces to it. But let me just begin by some of the key learnings from the WRI work. I mean, it's very exciting work. And I think there's a few reasons why WRI's work is so exciting. And there's a lot we can learn from it here in Canada. I mean, I think the first thing that jumps out at me is just how ambitious it is. I mean, these are folks who really, really want to make a big change. I mean, by 2030, less than 7 years from now, they want all buses, school buses in the States, to be electric. And I think that's wonderfully ambitious. So that would be the first thing that jumps out at me. The second thing is that social justice is not an afterthought or sort of a tag-along. Social justice is baked into the project from the start. It is what the project is about. And I think that's wonderful. The goal is an equitable transition, focusing first on underserved communities. So that's very impressive to me. I also really love the breadth of the campaign partners. I mean, I looked at that list that Carla showed us. It's a wonderful slide there, very visually impactful. But what it says is you've got folks from the Lung Association, you know, primarily about health, right to the Sierra Club and everybody in between. So it's not just a little niche. You've got a very wide an impressive group of campaign partners. And I think that's marvelous in terms of movement building. And the final thing I'd say, Sunita, is the hopefulness that I see in the WRI's approach. I mean, it's a campaign about social justice. It's a campaign about our children's health. It's about tackling air quality. It's about addressing the climate crisis. It's a very, very hopeful message. So those are some of the things that really jump out at me in this great work by WRI.
Fantastic. Thank you. And please forgive me for missing out on my duties as a moderator and not introducing you, Gideon. So if the audience would just bear with me for a moment, I just would like to introduce Gideon, who has been a climate change policy analyst with the David Suzuki Foundation since 2015. At the DSF, he promotes the expansion of public transit and active transportation. He received his master's in philosophy from McGill University and a certificate in renewable energy from the University of Toronto in 2013. He received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in recognition of his environmental work. Thank you for that, and thank you for putting up with my clumsiness here. I appreciate your patience. Like, that's quite the introduction that I just about hopped over and skipped, so forgive me for that. And also, Jessica, I would like to introduce you before I fire off the next question. Jessica leads the zero emissions vehicle work at Indigenous Clean Energy, including ICE's Charge Up program, which is delivering charging infrastructure incentives to Indigenous communities and business nationwide. So moving along, we will, with our panel questions, I think the next question would be, feel free to take it, anyone. Why should it be at the forefront of Canada's ESB rollout? Just building on what we asked Gideon earlier, why do you think that?
Sorry, can I jump in though? Is it okay?
Please do.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and I just want to say it's part of a space supporting equity and inclusion. We want to make sure that perfection is not being centered either. We're all human. And so, you know, you're doing a great job, and I thank you so much. I want to say, Carla, that was a wonderful presentation. I would love to give my 2 cents about takeaways as well. I would definitely, I have many more questions, but I really, I like your statement, budgets are moral documents. And I think it's such a big part of the conversation is you can have all, you know, the good intentions in the world, but if you don't have the resources to support the work, again, that's another level of inequity when you're asking people to do it with their own labor without being compensated. So I think that was a big takeaway. I'd also really love to learn a little bit more about the innovative financial kind of solutions that you mentioned. So perhaps when we get back to the, you know, the question and answer period, if there's room, and if you want to elaborate a little bit more about that, that would be great. But yes, overall, incredibly inspiring to see work being done centering equity, inclusion, justice. So thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Jessica.
You're welcome.
Actually, the next question is for you, Jessica.
Oh.
How are Indigenous communities impacted by this transition, and what can be done to improve access and justice for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many Indigenous communities are rural and remote communities. So they face a lot of the same challenges that other non-urban communities face, such as a lack of exposure to EVs and EV infrastructure. Many communities don't have reliable broadband, which is necessary if groups want to receive payment for the use of charging equipment, or in this case, in the context of what we're talking about today with electric school buses, managing their energy output. A lot of communities might be quite close to the limits that their grid can support. And so managing those costs for one, but also managing the security and safety of their grid also depends on having some of those network options for the charging equipment. Also, some communities, actually many communities, don't have three-phase power, which means that they can't put a level 3 charger in their communities without expanding their project significantly beyond the charging installation itself. You add to that many groups are currently working on addressing other major infrastructure demands. So there's competition for capacity within communities. And also sometimes it's those demands, but it's also because they're taking on some wonderful new large scale projects. That being said, from my experience, there's a lot of interest in supporting the transition to sustainable transportation, and so many opportunities to improve access. One of the biggest pieces is building awareness, and that's from my experience in working with different Indigenous groups, businesses, and communities. So my program, as you mentioned, my program supports the purchase and installation of charging infrastructure, but oftentimes, there's a big time lag between the point when a group might reach out to learn about the program and the point that they're able to carry out the project, because a lot of learning has to happen. So that groups can choose the right equipment, that they can find appropriate locations, partners, and often, in many cases, they are often acting as ambassadors and educators themselves. So that means that having programs with more flexibility, especially in terms of timelines, is super important. And then further to that, talking about building capacity, awareness, and resources that are culturally relevant. So again, this is something that Carla spoke about very eloquently. But at ICE, we are hoping to actually have a program that really does center Indigenous inclusion within this transition, and so that may mean creating different types of media that includes Indigenous participation. It could be providing culturally relevant resources that can be shared for community engagement, highlighting people working on projects, as well as things like supporting our youth and in learning about what all the different career options are in this EV sector. And so we have a program called Generation Power that has supports youth internships, as well as mentoring, a lot of mentoring. So, for people in the industry that are interested in supporting this inclusion, also, consider making yourself available for mentorship opportunities for Indigenous youth or community champions. That's another way to improve access.
Terrific. Thanks. I'm just curious, what is the appetite like for when you mentioned building awareness, and what is that like? What is the uptake like in the Indigenous community?
Well, there isn't a single Indigenous community. There's and I'll acknowledge that we're talking about a whole range. There are a lot of people who do know. They have had exposure. When I was my previous answer, I was referring to a lot of groups that are farther away from urban centers that often don't know anybody who has an EV. They're focused on a lot of other things, but yeah, there's, from the groups that I've been meeting with, electric vehicles. They definitely it aligns with many Indigenous groups' values. So we're stewards of land and water and air, and this is something that is very, very important. And a lot of people are interested in economic development opportunities. In Canada, there are a lot of gaps, and so currently there are a lot of Indigenous business owners that own, for example, gas stations. So there's an opportunity there that to participate economically, to increase travel and tourism, and also just support your community members. Transportation is needed for everything, absolutely everything. So this transition is coming, and there are a lot of Indigenous leaders looking to support their community members and guests.
Fantastic. That's great to learn. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Gideon, we'll move this next question to you. What can be done to mitigate these impacts and ensure persons with disabilities, low incomes, women, and gender diverse people, seniors, children, people of color, etc., are included in a just transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we need is the notion of social benefits agreements. You know, one of the wonderful things that's coming out of the energy transition is a lot of jobs. You know, as we put more solar panels up and build windmills and build out light rail and, you know, electric buses and electric school buses, are going to be creating a lot of jobs. We absolutely have to make sure that marginalized folks have a carve out within these jobs that are being created, so that it is guaranteed when you're building a new bus line, for example, or you're building electric school buses, that there is a place there for marginalized folks. It's not left to chance, but it's built right in. That's crucially important.
Wonderful. Thank you. Carla, you've had a bit of a break. Why should environmental justice in the ESB transition be considered beyond our own borders? What are the global implications of electric school buses with consideration for mineral extraction, air pollution, diesel bus disposal, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for the break. But it's been wonderful to hear from both Gideon and Jessica. Thank you both for your feedback on the WRI equity framework for the ESB initiative. One of the things we really try to do is get this project and this approach in front of as many people as possible, and use that as an opportunity to edit and improve what we're doing. So it is like an iterative process for us. So that's really helpful to hear what you all are doing and your thoughts on it. So why should environmental justice in ESBs be considered beyond our own borders? So the ESB initiative is set up to address environmental justice and equity along the supply chain and among key actors in what we consider to be the ESB ecosystem, right? This includes battery and bus manufacturers, utilities, and school districts. Like, it is a comprehensive way of approaching this, so that you don't just, like, you know, you can put a school bus, you can give an electric school bus to a school district, but that doesn't get you to a tipping point of making sure that this whole process is equitable. So what we've learned is that environmental justice and equity, as I've shared before, if it's not considered early on, and I think Gideon, you were getting at this, you and Jessica, if it's not considered early on in the transition, historically impacted communities will likely within our neighboring communities or along the supply chain, we will see those impacts. So we need to take that into consideration. And in some of the global impacts, our team is working on the life cycle of batteries and retired batteries and retiring batteries. And we're looking at responsible supply chain sourcing and disposal. So that's like extracting minerals to manufacture EVs can greatly impact tribal and indigenous communities. I think you mentioned a little bit of that, Jessica. And that's especially the case, also is the case in the US, where we've seen a large percent of lithium reserves, almost 80% if I'm not mistaken, are within 35 miles of tribal reservations. And on the other end, batteries could end up in landfills if not recycled properly. And so we know that landfills are predominantly in communities of color in the US and across the global South. And our team is researching approaches to safely and sustainably have battery end-of-life management plans, and considering the viability of battery reuse programs in second life energy storage. So yeah, I mean, again, a comprehensive view of this, because I think sometimes people might think of we want to address equity in this particular project, but not really thinking of the butterfly effect that some of these things do have when you're doing this work.
Thank you. What kind of how do you think that different countries can work together to ensure this transition, Carla?
A couple of different ways. There are collaborative platforms like the Global Battery Alliance, or partnerships between similar initiatives like ESBI, like our initiative with CISPA, and which has been great to kind of work with you all and connect with you all regularly. Really just about sharing and developing research and policy solutions. So thinking about working together on transparency disclosure for companies, environmental justice regulations for facility placement and planning, or successful demonstration projects, and really sharing best practices that each of us can take from, right? One of the things that we are beginning to do, and I think you may have seen on the earlier slide, the upcoming research that we're doing. I'm so excited about the research that we have with the contractor who's working on what would be the framework for tribal electric school bus transition, right? We also have a wonderful contractor we're working with to help us get a really good sense of what are the hurdles and challenges and therefore solutions for the electric school bus transition that our students with disabilities and the disability community is facing. We can't leave those communities out, right? So I'm really excited to see what that looks like as well. And I see these are things that CISPA is also, exploring or beginning to think about as you kind of go into this next year.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carla. Gideon, perhaps you would like to take a stab at the next one. I was just wondering, what can policymakers, government officials, fleet operators, and advocacy groups do to ensure environmental justice and equity is embedded in Canada's ESB rollout? And what kind of engagement, research, and piloting is needed in order to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is a commitment. As I said earlier, like what's wonderful about Carla and her team's work is that it's not equity, social justice are not an add-on, they're not an afterthought, they're not a little sidebar, they are the center. And so I think that's the way we need to come at this work. Environmental work has to fundamentally be social justice work. That's very much the way we see it at our organization, the David Suzuki Foundation here in Canada. When we're doing work on renewable energy, I was just in Ottawa recently talking to members of Parliament in Ottawa, and we're talking about the importance of renewable energy. We make sure that at the table, speaking to parliamentarians with us, are First Nations voices, because they are centrally involved in the decisions about renewable energy. When we fight a highway through a green belt, we're active now in southern Ontario here in Canada, trying to stop a highway that the Ontario government wants to build through our green belt. We're saying not only is that bad for the environment, but that highway, which will cost billions of dollars, upwards of 8 or more billions of dollars, that money is wasted on the highway and is taken away from human needs, taken away from hospitals and education, daycare, and things that people need desperately in their lives. So we always embed a social justice lens in all of our environmental work. And the short answer to your question is I think that that's the way we have to go at this in terms of building out the electric school buses.
Great. Thank you, Gideon. Perhaps, Jessica, you would like to share with us where can folks go to learn more about the ICE Charge Up program?
Sure. And if it's okay, I'd also like to add on a little bit to what Carla was just mentioning. But I'll tell you first, I think I've shared the links with you. If you're, it would be wonderful if you would share them in the chat. You can visit our website, Indigenous Clean Energy, and the program is called Charge Up. We also have last week, I think it was last week, I did a webinar as part of an icebreaker series that did a bit of a deep dive into the program. that's available on ICE's YouTube channel, Indigenous Clean Energy's YouTube channel. So please share that around. We, increasing awareness is what we're talking about as well here. So please use your platforms and help to amplify. That would be greatly appreciated. But if it's okay, Carla, I really appreciate you bringing up critical minerals. It was something that I did want to talk about in terms of equity and in terms of this transition. It is a major factor. And industry and government groups, amongst others, are collaborating extensively already and have been, and they should be. But I think it's the responsibility also of everyone holding a platform and everyone seeking to profit from this transition to be making sure you're leading with respect for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. So if you're at a gathering of sector leaders, as Gideon mentioned, are there Indigenous leaders present? Are you listening, reflecting, and where feasible, acting on what you've learned? And if you are in gatherings, different spaces where Indigenous participants aren't present, are you raising that with organizers so that they know that at least to you and hopefully to others, that Indigenous inclusion is a priority? If there are barriers to access to these spaces, which a lot of the times there are you advocating to reduce these barriers? I'll share that I have been invited to a lot of spaces as a guest where presenters have not had, an Indigenous audience, in their minds when they're creating a presentation. And the way that they speak about the transition is very, very different from when they're speaking to Indigenous audiences. For example, focusing on the great opportunities for generational wealth and the blessings that Canada has in mineral wealth, as though these resources belong to industry and government, and accessing them is a foregone conclusion. And so it is really important that Indigenous rights and values are centered in these conversations, and that we don't just talk about free, prior, and informed consent when we are speaking to Indigenous people. And we all know that Canada and extractive industries have a history of creating a lot of harm that impacts Indigenous people and the health of the land, water, and air. So we know that critical minerals are needed for this transition, but we have to be accessing them in a good way to reduce risks and harms. And we have a lot to learn from Indigenous people about how to be good stewards, as I mentioned earlier, and that these values and perspectives need to be prioritized in this transition.
So true. Thank you for that, Jessica. Thank you. Carla, I think we're almost coming up to time, and there's one question that we were wondering, what kind of, how can we highlight the next steps with WRI's equity framework?
Oh, how can we highlight the next steps? So for us in 2024, so the last couple of years, we have really been focused on conducting our research. We have several different research products that I shared earlier that we are working on to publish, and not only share that with the public, but from that research, we kind of learn what those findings are, and then we bring that back to our project. But as we are now beginning to wrap that work up, for 2024, we are really trying to get it out into the hands of the public and to share it with as many people as possible and get that feedback, get that input, really drive the conversation of why should we have an equitable transition to ESBs, but really driving more to make sure that people understand it needs to actually happen. And here is why, right? We've got the research that helps kind of really push that forward. So some of the things that we're doing are activities just like this, getting out and doing as many webinars as we can. We are trying to make ourselves more available to submit workshops for different conferences. And one of the things I really say to my team and to the project is, while we're talking about the equity framework, we don't need to just be focused on talking to an equity audience. So our projects we're not trying to just go to conferences that are focused on environmental justice and equity. While those are great, we need to be talking to conferences that have an audience of manufacturers, conferences that have an audience of school districts, which I think we've been really active last year, getting in front of a number of conferences that where the audience is school boards or school officials or school transportation officials. But we also need to be talking to the utilities and being in that space with them, because this is a message that everybody needs to hear. And so that's one of the other ways to highlight this, but also looking for opportunities to partner and collaborate, share experiences, so that people who are beginning to go and organizations going through these processes, they don't have to start from scratch. They can reach out. Some of this work has already been done, and there are organizations, not just in the U.S., but in other places that, other countries that are doing this work, and kind of building that community of how we do this is going to help everyone across the board.
So true. Fantastic. I see our chat has been lighting up too, but most of the questions have been answered right in the chat. Just wanted to, and we are right at time almost, so I think I would just like to conclude with a huge gratitude towards all of you for sharing in the important discussion. And we're pleased to inform everyone that this conversation does not stop here today. SASBA will be pursuing research on this topic, and in 2024, there is so much more work to be done and action to be taken, as we've learned today, to advance equity and environmental justice in the coming months and years. To conclude today's session, we encourage you to stay in touch with SASBA by visiting the online resource library at eschoolbusalliance.ca, and join our mailing list and follow the coordinating organizations Equiterre and Green Communities Canada on social media. We also encourage our audience to keep an eye out for our upcoming report, Accelerating Electric School Bus Adoption in Canada, set to be released on November 15th. And we thank everyone who joined us today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunita.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.